Our skies are full of mysteries. Unidentified flying objects secretly investigated by government agencies all over Europe for decades.
I'm mystified by these events. I have no explanation for them. It's a genuine mystery.
For the first time, we've collated sightings and reports from across an entire continent.
We had 233 sightings, which is a lot.
Some experts insist many sightings have rational explanations.
UFOs are real. People see them every day. But UFO simply means unidentified flying object. It doesn't have to mean extraterrestrial spacecraft.
But some continue to defy understanding.
So what could we be talking about? It's a big, big question that nobody, including the French authorities, have been able to answer.
Are these visitors from other worlds or natural phenomena? Do our European governments know more than they ever reveal? The answers may lie in the untold stories of the UFO files of Europe. For decades, governments across Europe have been keeping files on UFO sightings. To this day, a handful of these cases remain unexplained. Like the wave of UFO sightings that hit Belgium like an epidemic. The 4 Swedish pilots who have a close encounter at 3,000 feet. And in France, a witness with a story that's hard to believe, and forensic tests which show that truth may be stranger than fiction. Eupen, Belgium, 29th of November 1989. It began that night. But then the sightings go on and on. In town after town, all across Belgium, and they're seen by hundreds of witnesses.
My wife said, it's a UFO. So, well, that's not possible, that's not a UFO, it's an airplane. But after 5 minutes, I changed my mind.
Until the military authorities scrambled 2 fighter jets to try to put an end to one of the biggest waves of UFO sightings ever to hit Europe.
Overall, there were over 2,000 sightings. 650 of those cases were actively investigated, and over 500 of them were determined to be unexplained.
So many sightings that they became known as the Belgian Wave. The wave begins with 2 policemen on the outskirts of Eupen. It's 5:15 p.m. and something is about to happen to them that they'll never forget.
The Belgian Wave is a fascinating series of UFO sightings. The first part of this involves a number of police witnesses, 2 of whom actually encountered a UFO at very close proximity.
Physicist August Mason has compiled a dossier on the wave of UFO sightings that starts with the 2 policemen.
They were driving and they saw lights where it shouldn't be. They stopped their car at the roadside.
The policemen see an unidentified flying object hovering over a field by the side of the road.
When they discovered it, it was stationary at about 120 meters above the ground.
They described a vast triangular-shaped craft with lights at each corner and a larger, dimmer light in the middle. They were looking at this object, effectively, from directly underneath.
And were very astonished to hear no sound at all coming from there.
After a few minutes, the UFO moves away. Still dumbfounded, the policeman set off, hoping to follow it. Leslie Kane is an American UFO researcher who's written about the events of that night. And what the policeman saw by the field was only the beginning.
And they were following this object for a while. It went over a lake. The very strange thing is it spent time over this lake for a while, and when these red light bowls were sort of shot out of the craft towards the water over and over again. It's almost like they were on a rubber band. They were shot out and kind of pulled back.
The policemen are completely baffled, but there's more.
And these 2 officers watched this strange event happen. Then a second craft appeared. So there were at least 2.
The second UFO flies over the lake, but soon departs to the north, leaving the first to continue its strange behavior. 40 minutes later, that too departs, but to the southwest. The two officers are left trying desperately to figure out what they've just seen. It's a debate that has raged ever since. Dr. David Clark is a consultant for the UK National Archives UFO project.
They thought it was a huge, dark, triangular-shaped object, but when you actually look at their testimony, they saw a number of bright lights in the sky. Now, it's human perception to find patterns in chaos, and if you see a formation of lights in the sky, let's say 3 lights in the sky, automatically, if you can't see anything else, your mind might think, 3 lights in the sky, are they attached to the edges of a triangular-shaped object?
The 29th of November 1989 is a clear night, so the stars and planets are visible. Could the lights in the sky be astronomical objects?
As an astronomer, I find it very difficult to explain this sighting. A set of lights moving together in formation really doesn't tie in with any of the things that I as an astronomer see in the sky. So I think we need to look somewhere else for an explanation, maybe towards the aeronautical sector.
In fact, a number of theories have emerged about the lights in the sky.
The other question that was continuously raised was whether these objects could have been some kind of exotic, sophisticated, secret technology that was being flown around by some other country, possibly to test it out.
The American stealth bomber, the F-117 Nighthawk, was, until 1988, a closely guarded secret, and it is roughly triangular. Nick Pope has investigated UFO reports for the Ministry of Defense in Britain.
Some people have suggested that maybe stealth aircraft were involved. The Belgian military, and indeed British and American, checked into this very carefully. No records were found that any stealth aircraft were operating in the areas at the time.
But that's not the only problem with the stealth bomber suggestion, because these aircraft don't hover, and they're certainly not silent. Aviation security expert Chris Yates suspects that the explanation may be far more conventional.
If we're talking about something that's hovering, we're talking more than likely about a helicopter of some sort. The eyewitness reports suggest no noise heard from these helicopters, and that's not necessarily a surprise, dependent upon where the flying object is, and dependent upon the weather conditions at the time, the direction the wind is blowing, how hard it's blowing, and so on. Could well be blowing the sound completely in a different direction.
If the two policemen made a mistake about a helicopter, then at least they're not alone. Because that night, a great many other people also report something strange in the sky.
For instance, another gendarme controlling passports at the frontier. There was a driver of an ambulance who saw it 2 times when he went to Einatten and when he came back. And the foreman, he saw the object directly coming towards him in silence. It flew over the roof of the building and then over the town, even over the town hall, where other witnesses saw it.
And it turns out over the course of the night, 13 police officers in 8 different locations witnessed these 2 objects which were traveling over an area of Belgium, and hundreds, probably over 1,000 civilians witnessed it.
And it doesn't end that night. In the month that follows, there are 233 separate reports of strange lights and mysterious flying objects. But for these sightings, there's another possible explanation: mass psychosis.
This is the genesis of a lot of UFO flaps, as they are often described, or waves, which is again a military term coined to describe a period of panic. What you get is you get a sighting reported by a credible witness. When these things are reported in the news media, there's headlines, there's TV stations reporting on this, people's awareness is suddenly raised. So people who are out at night, who would normally be looking down at the ground, start thinking, ooh, I read a story about police seeing something in the sky, I'll look up instead of looking down. And then they see something that looks unusual, which normally they would have ignored.
But the Belgian government is taking the wave very seriously. In fact, there are real issues for the military.
Obviously, the events in Belgium were of national security interest, certainly to Belgium, and therefore you would assume to other NATO countries.
The Ministry of Defence, although this took place outside the United Kingdom, was certainly aware of these incidents. In a sense, yes, we were concerned. This is part of NATO. If a structured craft penetrates the sophisticated air defense network with impunity, then yes, self-evidently, this becomes a defense issue. This becomes a national security issue.
So the Belgian Air Force must take charge of the crisis. Their first priority is to put an end to this situation of uncertainty once and for all.
They set up a system whereby when an object was reported and captured on radar and actually reported to police so that they knew it was legit, they had F-16 jets that they would scramble to try to go up and get a closer look at it.
So the F-16 fighters are standing by, just waiting for the next confirmed sighting of the UFOs. Belgium, the winter of 1989 to 90. Following the sighting of mysterious triangular objects by 2 policemen, a wave of UFO reports sweeps the country. Determined to resolve the situation, the Belgian Air Force are ready to scramble 2 F-16 fighter jets. But they will only be scrambled to investigate a sighting that is confirmed by police and backed up by a definite contact on ground radar. In the meantime, the population is left to wonder, are the UFOs of extraterrestrial origin or something more earthly, such as a helicopter? Patrick Ferrin was an investigator with SOBEPS, a civilian group who were trying desperately to keep track of all the UFO sightings.
In December 1989, we had 233 sightings. For the first 6 months of the year 90, we have 315 sightings, which is a lot.
One theory is that the whole Belgian wave is a form of mass hysteria. People read about the 2 policemen and then start seeing imaginary UFOs themselves. This theory could also explain why so many people report triangular-shaped objects.
When you get these reports from police officers now, they're always of these triangular-shaped objects. Now, you've got to, again, trace that back. Where did the idea of these big triangular-shaped objects come from? Well, I remember, as a 13-year-old, going to see Star Wars in 1977, and anyone who saw that film will remember the huge Imperial Star Destroyer coming into shot, and it is a huge wedge-shaped triangular object. And that's when, strangely enough, when people started seeing UFOs, they started reporting them as triangular-shaped.
However, the Belgian Air Force is taking the matter seriously, and hundreds of witnesses are still baffled by what they've seen, even to this day. Witnesses like Albert Ruiz.
When Nicole said, my wife said, it's a UFO, that's not possible, that's not a UFO, it's an airplane. But after 5 minutes, I changed my mind.
At 12:30 a.m. on Christmas Day, 1989, Albert Ruiz and his family are returning home late from a visit with friends. They're on the motorway close to this junction when something ahead catches his eye.
I see 2 lights. And I said to my wife, Nicole, there's something strange. And when we came closer, we saw a very strange engine, it's rectangular, composed by 4 triangles. It was enormous. It's like a football field. I made the model 10 years later. He was stationary, and he was moving very, very slowly on this side.
Ruiz used his model to make pictures in order to help explain to people exactly what he saw.
That was my first impression. Then when we came closer, we saw it better. And then from the side, when we passed the bridge, and it was away. I was curious. I said to Nicole, I said to my wife, stop. And she said, no, you are crazy, stop on the highway. I don't do that.
Ever since then, Ruiz has pondered what it could have been.
An airplane is impossible. It was stationary. They don't move in the air. An helicopter, it moves a little bit in the air, but it's not a rectangle. An helicopter, that's impossible. It's impossible. It makes too much noise. Now we have the noise we hear was only the noise of the engine of the car. So I think it was really something not terrestrial.
The wave of sightings continues into the spring of 1990. And then something happens in the town of Petit-Rochin. It seems that someone has managed to take a photograph. The picture is thoroughly examined and analyzed by a whole array of scientific experts.
And all these people, expert in optic or in physics or in digital analysis, came with the same conclusion. We don't know what it is, but we are not able to demonstrate it's a fake. So it looks like a real photograph, but a photograph of what, we don't know.
And that's the question the Belgian Air Force is determined to answer. A pair of F-16s are waiting for a sighting to come in that is confirmed by both police and radar.
Then came the night of March 31. How did it start? Well, a policeman phoned the radar that he saw very strange lights in the sky.
And the radar station has a matching unidentified trace. So the F-16s get the order to scramble. Guided by their ground controllers, the fighters close in.
They acquire the UFO briefly on their airborne radar, but then the UFO somehow manages to break the lock.
Something was moving at 800 to 1,000 kilometers per hour, rising in 7 seconds from 900 to 4,000 meters.
The unknown object performs maneuvers so fast and abrupt, they would produce a force 22 times greater than gravity, something that few humans could survive for long.
You have this situation where the pilots are flying towards the UFO, they've got it on their radar, then they lose the radar signal, they reacquire the UFO in a different part of the sky, and this goes on for quite some time.
After chasing the elusive radar contact for almost 25 minutes, the F-16s admit defeat and return to base. They couldn't get close enough to make visual contact, and it seems there's a question mark about what they saw on radar.
The problem was that the equipment malfunctioned on the second jet, and so they only got one recording of it. And because of that, the Air Force felt that it wasn't definitive. Without the second thing to confirm it from another location, they couldn't be 100% sure.
There's an awful lot of talk about the infallibility of radar systems on board fighter aircraft, but it happens to be the case that, for example, temperature inversions between the various different layers of atmosphere can oftentimes end up sending false returns back to the receiving antenna that's being used at that time.
I've interviewed the pilot who flew the plane that actually did capture the data, and he's absolutely convinced that what he captured was actually there.
What they didn't do is get eyeballs on whatever the objects happened to be. They weren't that close, so no visual sighting of the unidentified flying objects.
The Belgians called a press conference, and they said that their conclusion was that this incident had taken place just as everyone had said, but they had no conventional explanation for this.
As 1990 goes on, the number of reported sightings dies down, and the chance to make a confirmed contact dwindles. The F-16s may have failed, but at least there's still the Petit-Rochin photograph.
Et puis je l'ai peint à la bombe.
For over 2 decades, this photo has been widely held to be the best evidence of UFOs from the Belgian wave.
Et puis après ça, on a commencé à faire des trous avec un crayon, un bec crayon. Elle l'a au marqueur rouge.
But then, in July 2011, factory worker and amateur photographer Patrick Maréchal makes a devastating confession.
Le choix du triangle, ça s'est fait parce que la vague belge. Donc les gens voyaient un triangle, donc on a recréé le triangle.
He made a model out of polystyrene, hung it up in his garden, and took the picture. Maréchal was only 18 years old at the time, and although his photo was just a prank, somehow it fooled all the experts.
This adage, the camera never lies, is complete nonsense. In this case, the guy was just having a joke and a laugh. And often, when people make a prank like this, they don't realise at the time that they are telling the story how far it's going to go.
When the photo was revealed as a hoax, some people began to question the credibility of all the Belgian wave sightings.
We have a lot of details that has nothing to do with helicopters or Venus or fakes or things like that. So there is still a problem. And it is not because you have one false document, one hoax in the whole thing, that you may throw the whole thing away and say, wow, the whole Belgian wave is just a mistake.
I'm mystified by these events. I have no explanation for them. It's a genuine mystery.
Overall, in the Belgian wave, there were over 2,000 cases reported, 2,000 sightings. 650 of those cases were actively investigated, and over 500 of them were determined to be unexplained. That's a huge volume of unexplained cases.
500 events that remain a mystery to this day. Open cases in the UFO files of Europe. In the skies over Sweden, 4 pilots see something they cannot explain.
During that flight, we saw something very strange. It was a flying object.
Their report goes into a secret file held by military intelligence.
My reaction was this was very interesting. It was an interesting object.
But despite exhaustive investigation, almost 3 decades later, the mystery still remains.
It's a bona fide UFO. It's an unidentified flying object.
Söderhamn, Sweden, 18th of August, 1985. A Cessna 172 is flying south. Inside are 4 friends returning home from an overnight trip to an air show in Finland. All 4 of them are fully trained amateur pilots. Their course is running parallel to a line of long-distance power cables. Then one of them, Jan-Erik Henriksson, spots something strange. There is something flashing in the distance. At first, he thinks it's a light or lamp in the sky.
Suddenly I saw it was not a lamp. It was something moving toward us. It was reflecting the sunlight. That's why we thought it was a lamp.
Whatever the mysterious object is, it seems to be coming straight at them.
First, we were afraid that it was on the same altitude as we, because then it was very easy to hit. But then we saw it was lower, and then we all looked at it. What in hell is this?
The UFO is like nothing they've ever seen before. It approaches quickly and shoots past below.
The pilot made a very sharp 180 degrees turn, and we followed the flying object.
I was so close that I could see details, small details, on this object.
Klaus Svan is a Swedish journalist who has investigated this case.
I could really see that this was nothing well known. It was not another aircraft, not a bird, but something much stranger.
As they follow the unknown craft, it makes odd, jerky movements from side to side. Henriksson suddenly realizes these movements are not random.
We came to a point where the electric power line took a different direction, and this flying object did also correct and follow the power line. So that's why we think that the flying object could feel and see and know.
The unidentified object is flying faster than the Cessna, so in a couple of minutes it's out of sight. The 4 friends are baffled. They call civilian air traffic control, hoping for an easy explanation. But there is no other known air traffic in the area. So the answer comes back negative.
Nobody sees.
The mystery is deepening, and for the rest of the flight home to Gävle Airport, they ponder what to do. If they talk about their UFO sighting, they're worried that they won't be believed.
And when we came to Gävle, we sat down and decided not to go to the newspapers, the Swedish newspapers. So we write a report to the Swedish security. And I have that report here. It is from '85. And that describes everything.
Henriksson sends the report to a special department inside the Swedish Defense Research Agency that was set up to deal with unidentified flying objects. Almost 30 years later, they've still got the incident on file.
In 1985, a man called Jan-Erik Henriksson reported to the Swedish Defense Research Agency an observation of a flying object.
The agency starts looking into the matter. In cases like this, their first line of inquiry is to get radar reports from the day. But since the UFO failed to register on radar, they have no solid evidence to continue the investigation.
The case was closed as far as the Swedish Defense Research Agency was concerned.
The only loose end is to inform Mr. Henriksson.
He did get a reply saying that they could give him no information regarding this flying object.
But that isn't the end of the matter. Because sometime later, Henriksson happens to run into a contact in the military.
And this officer, he said that maybe you should call the intelligence instead. So he contacted the air staff, the intelligence. And at that time, the head of that department was Jörg Feling.
For over 30 years, Jörg Feling was Chief of Technical Intelligence for the Swedish Air Force. So finally, Henriksson is in touch with someone who might help him find out what he saw that day.
My reaction was that this was very interesting. It was an interesting object.
Especially since this isn't the only report that Jörg Feling received about the UFOs at that time.
We had the same summer that some months before, in the month of June, further up in the north. But those observations were not so good as this one is, because this is made by 4 trained pilots in a plane.
One theory is that the UFO is a Swedish missile on a test-firing exercise. But as head of technical intelligence, Jörg Feling would know about it.
It was no Swedish activity in that area at that time. We had very close contact with our missile department, so they had nothing going on. This is, in my opinion, a little more advanced. It's too advanced for Sweden. We didn't have the money and technology to do that.
In fact, if the UFO is a missile of any known type, Swedish or foreign, Jörg Feling would recognize it.
Everything on foreign missiles, everything, every news about that came into my office in one form or another.
So if it wasn't any known type of missile, what did the 4 pilots see?
It's a bona fide UFO. It's an unidentified flying object.
But there is another theory, that it's some new kind of missile from the Soviet Union. In the mid-1980s, the Cold War is still raging. Tension had rarely run so high between the Soviet Union and the West.
I don't believe that this was a Soviet missile that had somehow gone astray for a whole variety of reasons, not least of which is that the borders surrounding Russia at that time, particularly the Baltic countries, happened to have some of the most sophisticated surveillance equipment known to man. And if any hardware had suddenly gone astray, then quite evidently a particular diplomatic crisis would have followed.
Not least because someone is sure to have noticed when it came down.
A missile like that doesn't go on forever. They have a limited amount of fuel on board.
I think the question why someone should fly over Sweden at this very low altitude during daylight, why expose your new military devices, maybe crashing them, maybe having them photographed, which is not very wise, of course. That is a very, very valid question, and I don't see a very easy answer to that, because foreign power wouldn't do something like that.
The suspicion that it might be a Soviet missile lingers until a few years later, when the Iron Curtain starts to crumble and their military secrets begin to seep out. Jörg Feling hoped then to discover long-denied details of their covert operations. But as he picked through the Soviet files, he found nothing that explained what the 4 pilots saw.
We still wonder what it could have been.
The case remains unsolved, so Henriksson and the others will probably never know what happened on that day in August 1985. When a UFO appears over France, the only witness is astounded as a mysterious craft comes to Earth.
The sighting involved not simply lights in the sky, but the much more serious allegation that the UFO had actually landed.
And after it leaves, physical marks are found on the ground that spark one of the biggest UFO inquiries in French history.
On a affaire à un objet matériel, c'est certain. Mais on en ignore totalement la nature et l'origine.
And while the witness is baffled by what he saw, the lab results reveal something stranger than anyone could imagine. Aix-en-Provence, France, 8th of January, 1981. 55-year-old Renato Nicolai is working on his property. There's no one else around. Suddenly, something catches his attention. Above the trees, he sees something glinting in the light. As it draws closer, it's revealed as a mysterious metallic object. Then slowly, it comes down to land. Nikolai has never seen anything like it. After 30 or 40 seconds, the strange object takes off again and disappears into the sky. When it's gone, Nikolai approaches cautiously to look at where it landed. And to his astonishment, he sees circular marks on the ground. The experience leaves him shaken. He doesn't know what to make of it. But the next day, after talking to his wife, he reports the incident to the police. And in France, the investigation of UFOs is taken very seriously indeed.
Some countries aren't interested at all. Some countries investigate. In France, their UFO project is embedded in the French National Space Centre, and their UFO office, GEPON, looks at this from the perspective of space phenomena.
So after examining the site, the police call GEPON at the French Space Agency. Jean-Jacques Velasco later became head of the organization, but at the time, he was the investigator who took on the Aix-en-Provence case.
Donc on avait un telex qui nous disait il y a quelqu'un qui a aperçu un objet qui a atterri dans son jardin et il y a des traces qui restent au sol. Donc on s'est dit c'est intéressant, on va donc faire enfin une enquête rapidement sur les lieux.
This enabled the investigators to not just interview the witnesses, but to conduct a proper scientific analysis of the area where the UFO was seen to touch down.
The police took photographs of the area. They're skeptical about the marks on the ground, but the UFO investigators are determined to examine the site for themselves.
On a tout de suite vu qu'il y avait une empreinte sur le sol, donc il fallait intervenir pour mesurer les traces effectives. Et puis, dans nos procédures, on avait également des possibilités de pouvoir obtenir des analyses des végétaux.
Soil samples were taken, samples of the grass and plants were taken away, and a proper scientific analysis was done on this.
The laboratories begin work to assess the physical imprint that was made in the ground, as well as any effects on the soil and on the vegetation. But while these tests are underway, back in Aix-en-Provence, Renato Nicolai has been telling his story.
Je ne peux pas dire que c'était une soucoupe volante, que c'était... J'ai vu quelque chose, oui. Il s'est posé, il est reparti.
He makes a simple drawing of what he saw.
La forme, c'était comme si on posait deux assiettes, l'une sur l'autre.
Whatever Nicolai saw, it's both strange and unfamiliar. So could it be a piece of secret military hardware, such as a drone?
Drones come in all shapes and sizes. Many of these devices can be really quite small. They can take off vertically and land vertically, a VTOL sort of drone. And so it would seem that we're talking about some sort of perhaps experimental drone that had to drop in his field on that day, at that time, and scared the living daylights out of him.
There are a great number of UFO cases where people have seen something that they genuinely couldn't identify up in the sky, but then have been driven by their own hopes and desires or by cultural conditioning to believe that these are in fact extraterrestrial visitors. Once someone has made up their mind that they've seen an extraterrestrial spacecraft, it can be extremely difficult to change their minds.
The testimony of a single witness can always be questioned. There's always doubt about its reliability. But when Jean-Jacques Velasco receives the laboratory test results, he is astounded. And whatever was on Nicolai's property, it weighed a little more than just a figment of the imagination.
Avec un laboratoire de géologie, montrait que l'objet qui s'était posé pesait entre 700 et 800 kilos. Parce que l'empreinte mécanique avait fait une trace sur le sol qui correspondait à un objet de 700 à 800 kilos.
If the object weighed 600 to 800 kilos, that would rule out one possibility.
That seems a bit strange to me, because of the diameter of the object, that it will weigh quite so much. If we're talking about one of the early drones, probably not that sort of weight.
Of course, it could have been something larger, like a helicopter. But the weight isn't the only thing the lab tests reveal.
Ensuite, les analyses des particules qui ont été prélevées dans le sol ont montré que le sol avait subi un échauffement superficiel qui ne dépassait pas 5 à 600 degrés.
Well, certainly if we're talking about something powered, for example, by a jet engine, jet engines, by their very nature, produce very intense heat. Helicopters, of course, use jet engines, but those jet engines vent horizontally. The blast from the back of the engines goes towards the tail rotor. So that kind of throws out the theory of a helicopter.
But it's the final lab result that is the strangest of all.
Donc c'est ça qui est important. Mais surtout, ce qui est assez fondamental, c'est que c'est la végétation qui nous a apporté des indications sur les modifications. Les échantillons qui étaient sur la trace montraient un phénomène de vieillissement prématuré. Et le laboratoire a essayé de voir quel était le facteur qui avait modifié les acides aminés de ces plantes. Il n'y avait qu'un seul élément qui permettait de modifier les acides aminés, c'était des champs électromagnétiques, et en particulier des micro-ondes. Qu'est-ce qu'on peut en tirer comme conclusion? Qu'on a affaire à un objet matériel, c'est certain, mais on en ignore totalement la nature et l'origine.
So what could we be talking about? It's a big, big question that nobody, including the French authorities, have been able to answer.
In terms of this being a landing as opposed to just a vague light or shape in the sky, this is an extremely significant UFO event.
It's been over 3 decades since the strange events at Aix-en-Provence. Since then, the physical evidence has been re-examined and reassessed a number of times. But no conclusive explanation has ever been found.
Il ne nous apporte pas les réponses sur la question que tout le monde se pose. Mais que sont ces objets et d'où viennent-ils?
So what happened to Renato Nicolai remains to this day one of the unsolved UFO files of Europe.